Hello YouTube. This TikTok live stream broadcast is specifically for you, so forgive me if I stray away. But before I begin, please let me hydrate because it's been a dry fast up until 12 p.m. today. So I have ginger water here. Finally getting hydrated today. As some of you guys know, my YouTube channel knows this, but the TikTok viewers, every day I will break my fast with a hot herbal tea. Okay, and this is ginger water. To stimulate my digestive organs. Okay, so thank you for all arriving here at the Holistic Dining Room Table / War Room Table. Okay, today I'm introducing Chapter 2 of the World Peace Diet, as written by Dr. Will Tuttle, okay? And let me grab it here. Will Tuttle brings a priceless perspective not only to the planetary crisis confronting us all, but also to powerful ways we can each affect it. This book is radiant with his experience, okay? Thank you for liking, I appreciate it. Cool, so yeah, I already have, look, I had chapter 1 read yesterday on the live streams. I'm attempting to upload it to my YouTube channel, so I will have it up today. So for now, this is just chapter 2. Chapter by chapter, they are going up to the YouTube channel, okay? Which is why I came onto the live stream today. Okay, Grant? Alright, so chapter 1 was Food's Power, okay? Where he goes over the importance of food and how it's kind of become a mundane way of nutrition, okay? Entertainment, rather. Okay. So, chapter 1 was Food Power. Chapter 2, Our Culture's Roots. And I posted a video earlier yesterday where Dr. Africa was explaining the detriments of animal flesh, dairy, etc. And I did have an individual in my comments this morning who was really clinging on to the roots of farming, okay? So chapter 2, Our Culture's Roots, okay? Because our food choices are embedded culturally, as this individual repeatedly reminded me of the... Okay, so... The multitude of your sacrifices, what are they to me, says the Lord? I have more than enough of burnt offerings of rams and the fat of fattened animals. I have no pleasure in the blood of bulls and lambs and goats. Your hands are full of blood. Wash and make yourselves clean. Take your evil deeds out of my sight. Okay, that's from Isaiah 111. This is just an introduction to the chapter. So, cruelty to animals is as if man did not love God. There is something so dreadful, so satanic, in tormenting those who have never harmed us, and who cannot defend themselves, who are utterly in our power. Cardinal John Henry Newman, okay. So the herding culture, without further ado, most of us don't think of what we see around us as a herding culture. We see mainly cars, roads, suburbs, cities, and factories. Excuse me. And while there are enormous fields of grain and cattle grazing in the countryside, we may not realize that almost all of the grain is grown as livestock feed, okay? and that most of the untold billions of birds, mammals, and fish we consume are confined and out of sight in enormous concentration camps called factory farms. All right, Daisy? Though it is not as obvious to us today as it was to our forebears a few thousand years ago, our culture is, like theirs, essentially a herding culture, organized around owning and commodifying animals and eating them. It was roughly 10,000 years ago that wandering tribes in the Kurdish hill country of northeastern Iraq began domesticating sheep and initiated a revolution with enormous consequences. Anthropologists believe it was an outgrowth of the hunting practices of these tribes, who began attaching themselves to particular herds of wild sheep, culling them and increasingly controlling their mobility, food, and reproductive lives. They eventually learned to castrate and kill off male sheep so that the herd consisted of primarily females with a few rams. From this, they learned selective breeding to create animals with more desirable characteristics. Goats were apparently domesticated soon after sheep, followed by cattle 2,000 years later to the west and north, and subsequently by horses and camels another 2 to 4,000 years after that. Highly charged concepts of property ownership and of male bloodlines and bloodline purity gradually emerged, of which there is ample evidence by the time historical period began about 4,000 years ago. So it's going to our cultural roots here as a herding culture. Okay, Daisy? Thank you, Hope117. Your comment was muted, but I did read it. Okay. All right. Bear with me, guys. The first drink of today. By the way, I'll have chapter 1 up today. The first upload attempt failed for some reason, so I'm going to retry that after this one. So yeah, so our Western culture can be seen as having two main roots: ancient Greece and the ancient Levant, the Eastern Mediterranean basin and Middle East. Reading the earliest extant writings from these cultures from about 3,000 years ago, like Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey, and the Old Testament accounts of the ancient kings and their wars, we find that these cultures were oriented around meat eating, herding, slavery, violent conquest, male supremacy, and offering animal sacrifices to their mostly male gods. Okay, welcome, Lila. For the old herding cultures, confined animals were not just food. There were also wealth, security, and power. Okay, so it started out as confining animals. Look, we just overlook how we got here, but originally, the old herding cultures confined these animals not just for food, but for wealth, security, and power, okay? So they're taking more from the animal already when they're... Do you see what's happening there? Okay, so the first money and form of capital were sheep, goats, and cattle. The first money and form of capital were sheep, goats, and cattle, for only they were consumable property with tangible worth. In fact, our word capital derives from capita, Latin for head, as in head of cattle and sheep. The first capitals were the herders who fought each other for land and capital and created the first kingdoms, complete with slavery, regular warfare, and power concentrated in the hands of a wealthy cattle-owning elite. Okay, our word pecuniary, and I don't know if I've ever heard that word before, comes from the Latin word pecus, P-E-C-U-S, meaning cattle, and the ancient Roman coin, the denarius, was so named because it was worth 10 asses. Livestock in the ancient herding cultures thus defined the value of gold and silver. Food animals were the fundamental standard of wealth and power. This fact gives us insight into the political might of the ranching and dairy industries that continues to this day. Okay, so this herding culture started long ago, okay, is what he's pointing out, our culture's roots. By commodifying and enslaving large, powerful animals, the ancient progenitors of Western culture established a basic mythos and worldview that still lives today at the heart of our culture. Ryan Eisler's The Chalice and the Blade and Jim Mason's An Unnatural Order summarize and digest the work of historians and anthropologists, providing some interesting perspectives on the fundamental value shifts that occurred when humans began dominating large animals for food and how these changes affect us in the present day. Okay, so human history was changed when the enslavement of large powerful animals was introduced. All right, is what he's pointing out. It's important to note here that the study and interpretation of history is notoriously subjective. We can notice in our own individual lives that our experience and understanding of our past changes as we change. This is obviously also true of the vast and complex collective past generated by millions of people. When we move into trying to understand prehistory, cultural past before written records, it becomes even more subjective. As historian Cynthia Eller writes, prehistory is still a huge and largely blank canvas. Thus, incredibly diverse scenarios can be painted upon it, depending on the predilections of individual thinkers. Okay? Ryan Eisler draws on the work of many anthropologists and writers, particularly Maria Gimbutas, Jacquetta Hawkes, and Merlin Stone, to argue that there have been basically two types of societies which she refers to as partnership and dominator, okay? In partnership societies, men and women are essentially equal and work together cooperatively, and Eisler attempts to demonstrate that this was the norm for many tens of thousands of years of human life prior to the expansion of patriarchal dominator cultures that were based on herding animals. Okay, pretty significant correlation. This relatively recent occurrence, herding animals 5,000 to 7,000 years ago, was due to what Gimbutas calls the Kurgan invasions by warlike herders from Central Asia, the Mongols, all right, into Eastern Europe and the Mediterranean basin. Striking ideas being expressed here. Thank you, Julie. Welcome, Zoe. Bringing a culture in which men viewed women as chattel, they apparently came in 3 waves over roughly 2,000 years, violently attacking, destroying, and fundamentally changing the older, more peaceful partnership societies, okay? So Genghis Khan and friends, it started with cattle, and then it evolved into dominating the feminine, and humanity are equal, okay? Which is we still struggling with today. Holding flag on humanity, Julie Gao. Holding. Okay. So, according to Eisler, Gimbutas, and others, these older cultures tended to eat foraged and garden foods, worship fertility goddesses, make communities in fertile valleys, use metals to make bowls rather than weapons. You can see examples of this in the Aztecs, etc. All right, and did not engage in war. The invading dominator cultures herded animals and ate mainly animal flesh and milk, worshipped fierce male sky gods like Enlil, Zeus, and Yahweh, settled on hilltops and fortified them, used metals to make weapons, and were constantly competing and warring and glorifying their conquests in Hollywood, okay? Violent conflict, competition, oppression of women, and class strife, according to Eisler, need not characterize human nature, but are relatively recent products of social pressure and conditioning brought by the invading herding cultures whose dominator values we have inherited. If I'm doing this and reading, he's pointing out significant. Thank you. When I read this, my perspective was absolutely being shifted. Okay, it makes sense. History is written by the people who are conquesting, who are enslaving us all. Okay. All right. So, where did these invading patriarchal cultures come from, and what made them that way? In a later book, Sacred Pleasure, Eisler cites the research of geographer James DeMeo, who ascribes the expansionist migrations of the Kurgan invaders and other herders to harsh climatic changes that set off a complex sequence of events: famine, social chaos, land abandonment, and mass migration that eventually led to a fundamental shift in human cultural evolution. Okay, herding livestock, Eisler points out, tends to lead to aridity and to produce a vicious cycle of environmental depletion and increasing economic competition for ever more scarce grazing grounds, thus a tendency for violent contest over territorial boundaries. Okay, she adds that the practice of herding animals produces the psychological hardening characteristics of dominator cultures. Okay, and this is an excerpt I'm going to read from, I believe, Eisler. This is what she cited in her book, Sacred Pleasure. Good afternoon, Jessica. I'm in chapter 2 of The World Peace Diet, Our Culture's Roots. Okay, so our culture's roots as a herding livestock. How that actually happened, we're going over right now. So, Eisler, who is a contributor to this book, she cited pastoralism relies on what is basically the enslavement of living beings, beings that will be exploited for the products they produce and that will be eventually. This would also help to explain the psychological armoring or deadening of soft emotions that DeMeo believes characterize the origins of patrist or dominator societies. Okay, that means people you see around you are apathetic to cheeseburger lifestyle. You ordered the book. Perfect, Jessica. So I'm on chapter 2. I'm posting chapter 1 on my YouTube channel, having some technical difficulties, but both chapters should be up today by the grace of the technology, of course. All right, so moreover, once one is habituated to living off enslaved animals for meat, cheese, milk, hides, and so forth, as practically the sole source of survival, one can more easily become habituated to view the enslavement of other human beings as acceptable. Okay, so he's saying when we started to eat meat, and this was before we were a grazer, we ate mostly plants. When we started to raise animals and herd animals, okay, our empathy towards human beings started to plummet as the way we treated the animals further and further deteriorated to what we have now. They are suffering out of sight on a mass scale. Welcome. Yes, Julie Gao, I ordered the World Peace Diet. And is that the book you are reading? Yes, it is, Julie Gao. So Julie Gao, thank you for liking. And as I discussed earlier, Julie Gao, I'm going to read this chapter. Sorry, this book chapter by chapter. So when I'm finished, I will carry on with you guys. Okay, so please hold. Thank you to my YouTube viewers for following. We just hit 250. Woohoo! So look, whether there actually were earlier cultures that were more peaceful, partnership oriented, and egalitarian, as Eisler and many others assert, or whether violent conflict, males, and competition have always dominated human socio-economic cultural structures is still a hotly contested issue among academics, okay? What seems undeniable, though, is the effect on human consciousness of commodifying and enslaving large animals for food. Jim Mason takes Eisler's work farther in this regard, developing some more historical and psychological connections between domination of animals and domination of other people. He points out that the agricultural revolution introduced profound changes into the ancient forager cultures, transforming their relationship with nature from one of immersion to one of separating from and attempting to control. Out of this separation, two types of agriculture emerged, plant and animal, and the distinction between them is significant. Growing plants and gardening is more feminine work. Plants are tended and nurtured, and as we work with the cycles of nature, we are part of a process that enhances and amplifies life. It is life affirming and humble from humus or earth. Work that supports our place in the web of life, okay? And yes, we should be taught this in schools, guys. Obviously, we should be taught this knowledge in schools. As human beings on planet Earth, we should know how to grow food from day one, right? On the other hand, large animal agriculture or husbandry was always men's work and required violent force from the beginning to contain powerful animals, control them, guard them, something I cannot say to them, and in the end, some things I cannot say because... Okay, so Mason also emphasizes the important influence that animals seem to have in human psychological development and health, as well as the violent psychosocial characteristic researchers find in observing cultures around the world that herd large animals. Citing anthropologists Paul Shepard and Anthony Leeds, he notes that Shepard... Okay, so Shepard's going to cite something here, and forgive me, guys. Pleasant Park. Is that a skate park? It's possible. I have been to that skate park before. List off the city it's in. Ticks off the main... Okay, so Shepard is going... I'm going to cite from anthropologist Paul Shepard and Anthony Leeds here. So, ticks off the main states of herder cultures the world over. Aggressive hostility to outsiders. The armed family. Feuding and raiding in a male-centered hierarchical organization. The substitution of war for hunting. Elaborate arts of sacrifice. Monomaniacal pride and suspicion. Okay, so just describing herder culture tendencies. You might have noticed some of those tendencies exaggerated in the South where I'm from. This is ginger water. Thank you. Ginger water, my first of the day. Thank you, Lucas. Dehydration Station slash Holistic Warrior Network Roundtable. So Mason points out the similarities in these respects among desert tribes of the Middle East. Chukchi reindeer herders of Eastern Siberia, who love to boast of feats of strength, acts of prowess, violent and heroic behavior, excessive endurance, and expenditure of energy, and our American cowboy rodeo culture. So he's finding similarities in these cultures, the cowboys, these reindeer herding cultures, the acts of sacrifice, the pride, okay, the hierarchy comes from this type of culture, all right? So building on the work of Eisler, Mason, and others, We can see that the culture where we live in today is a modern continuation of the herding culture that arose in the Middle East and Eastern Mediterranean basin, and that the central defining belief of this culture is still the same. Animals are commodities to be owned, used, and eaten. Okay? Animals are commodities to be owned, used, and eaten. Okay? That is the culture that drives our point home, that puts that point in our head every day. All right? That's what he's saying. And I just got this book. I shouldn't. Gosh, I'm so sorry. So yeah, by extension, nature, land, resources, and people are also seen as commodities to be owned, used, and exploited. While this seems logical to us today as modern inhabitants of a herding and animal consuming capitalist culture, this is a view with enormous consequences. The commodification of animals marked the last real revolution in our culture, completely redefining human relations with animals, nature, the divine, and each other. Okay, so it has, okay, the restaurant culture, the entertainment food culture. That is where we have entered into. All right, it has happened overnight. Okay, so in the old herding cultures, animals were gradually transformed from mysterious and fascinating cohabitants of a shared world to mere property objects to be used, sold, traded, confined, and no longer were they wild and free. They were treated with increasing disrespect and violence, and eventually became contemptible and inferior in the eyes of the emerging culture's herders. Okay, obviously, if you're going to deal with these animals on a day-to-day basis, you see them as food, they do something that you don't like, you are going to develop a superiority complex to these animals, which is what we see. Yes, conscious purchase. So wild animals began to be seen merely as potential threats to the livestock capital. Likewise, other human beings too began to be seen as threats to livestock, or as potential targets for raiding if they owned animals. All right, so here we go. Battling others to acquire their cattle and sheep was a primary capital acquisition strategy. The ancient Aryan Sanskrit word for war, gavwa, literally means the desire for more cattle. The ancient Aryan Sanskrit word for war, gavya, means the desire for more cattle. Page 22. Okay, everyone. So it appears that war, hurting animals, oppression of the feminine, capitalism, and the desire for more capital/livestock have been linked since their ancient birth in the commodification of large animals. The larger and more powerful the animals were that were herded, the more fierce, cruel, and violent the cultures had to be to successfully dominate them and protect them from marauding wild animals and people. Okay, so we are a culture of just starting from dominators to now we are being fed, factory farmed. It's going to be carry on the McDonald's path in 100 years, and I'm a little bit scared. Okay, so all right. So the largest animals were cattle and horses. And the cattle herding cultures that established themselves in the Middle East and Eastern Mediterranean engaged in unimaginably vicious warfare with each other and against weaker people for millennia, gradually and forcibly spreading their culture and herding values throughout Europe and most of Asia. From Europe, this same cattle culture eventually spread to the Americas. It continues to spread to this day through transnational corporations like ConAgra, Cargill, Smithfield, and my personal favorite, McDonald's, as well as through projects sponsored by the World Bank and the UN, religious missionaries, and charities that propagate animal slavery, like the Heifer Project. At the living core of this ancient culture that became what we call today Western civilization was the absolute supremacy of humans over animals, reinforced through daily meals. Wealth and prestige for men began to be measured in terms of how many livestock animals were owned and how large an area of land was controlled for grazing. The role model for young boys became that of the successful proto capitalist, the macho herder and warrior, tough, cool, emotionally distant, and capable of unflinching violence. Women, livestock, and captured or conquered people were property objects contributing to the total amount of capital. Wars, though horrific to combatants and the general population, were potent methods used by the wealthy aristocracy to increase its accumulation of capital slash cattle, land, power, and prestige. It's helpful to realize that the mentality of domination characterizing the culture into which we were born thrives on seeing and emphasizing differences and ignoring similarities. So, one more time, it's helpful to realize that the mentality of domination characterizing the culture into which we are born thrives on seeing and emphasizing differences and ignoring similarities. Because this is what enslaving and killing animals requires us all to practice. As herders and dominators of animals, we must continually practice seeing ourselves as separate and different from them, as superior and special. Our natural human compassion can be repressed by learning to exclude others and to see them as essentially unlike us. This exclusivism is necessary to racism, elitism, and war, because in order to harm and dominate other people, we must break the bonds that our heart naturally feels with them. The mentality of domination is necessarily a mentality of exclusion. It's obvious if we look closely that many of the root assumptions and activities of the ancient herding cultures still define our culture today. The single most defining activity of these ancient cultures was, as is today, feasting regularly on foods provided by the bodies of dominated and excluded animals. Wars still enrich a wealthy elite class, while millions bear the burden of them, and the world's rich feed on animals fattened on grain and fish while the poor go hungry. Our capitalistic economic system and its supporting political, legal, and educational institutions still legitimize our commodification and exploitation of animals, nature, and people. Our domination of the underprivileged and foreign, and an unequal and unjust distribution of goods based on predation, often emphasized as competition and free trade, oppression and war. As we have evolved socially, we have made some undeniable gains in reducing certain excesses and in providing some protection to the weak and vulnerable. On the whole, however, we have to wonder why our progress has been so slow and difficult. The answer to this is on our plates and extends from there to feedlots, slaughterhouses, and research laboratories, rodeos, circuses, racetracks, and zoos, to hunting, fishing, and trapping activities, prisons, ghettos, wars, and the military-industrial complex, and our ongoing destruction of the living world. Okay, so he's really getting into those that are contributing to this. to the society, okay? Make normalization. The Pythagorean principle. As long as men massacre animals, they will kill each other. Indeed, he who sows the seeds of murder and pain cannot reap joy and love. Pythagoras. I'm going to read the quote by Pythagoras one more time. Okay. Look. As long as men massacre animals, they will kill each other. Indeed, he who sows the seeds of murder and pain cannot reap joy and love. Pythagoras, okay? Very, very powerful quote by a very, very legendary individual. Over 2,000 years ago in ancient Greece, the need for a positive revolution based on compassion for animals was clearly understood and articulated by Pythagoras, recognized today as a genius, okay, whose discoveries are still of critical importance. Pythagoras remains an enigma, with some of his insights eagerly received and used, and others blatantly ignored. Okay, user 6, talking to you. His theorems laid essential foundations in mathematics and geometry and made possible subsequent progress in architecture, design, construction, cartography, navigation, and astronomy. Pythagoras and his students also discovered and applied the principles of harmonics that underlie vibrational tone intervals. So Pythagoras is credited with establishing the 7-tone scale on which Western music is founded, with its mathematically precise vibrational relationships. Oh my God. I'm sorry to my YouTube channel, number one, but I'm remembering why this book is so powerful. It's absolutely incredible, Chris, okay? If Pythagoras can see back then in ancient Greece, they needed to have more compassion for animals, and that it would lead to ultimate destruction in humanity. And we are still struggling with it today. It's a very, very good indication of our average IQ level. Very, very low, like user 6 and Chris. So their collective IQ levels combined is where the average American is sitting right now. Mid. Okay? Nothing like that of legendary Pythagoras himself. Okay? So guess what? In all these areas, our culture has zealously taken and benefited from Pythagoras' genius, but the underlying principle that he taught and lived by, okay user, okay Chris, compassion for all life, has been much harder for us to accept. His unequivocal teaching that our happiness depends on treating animals with kindness inspired Plato, Plutarch, Plotinus, the Gnostics, and the early fathers of the Christian church. And until 1850, when the word vegetarian was coined, anyone who refrained from eating animals was called a Pythagorean. The principle he proclaimed that we can never reap and enjoy love while sowing seeds of pain and death in our treatment of animals haunts us today. I'm sorry, YouTube. I'm sorry, everyone. I have to stop right here just for a second because I actually posted a video on this. So The word vegetarian was coined. Anyone who refrained from eating animals was called a Pythagorean. Okay? And I did post a video on this. I wasn't. Look, I'll post things, I'll throw things out there, just because. And look, that one was solidified in the book here. The early word for vegetarian was coined by Pythagoras himself. Okay, Pythagorean. 2,000 years after Pythagoras came the great Leonardo da Vinci. Okay, who's smarter than Leonardo da Vinci? Any of the YPOS, lactose intolerant? Are you guys as creative or intelligent as Leonardo da Vinci? No. Okay, so guess what, guys? 2,000 years after Pythagoras, who outweighs both of you, and no one will remember your names, came the great Leonardo da Vinci, another genius whose art and discoveries helped usher in the Renaissance. Again, our culture ignored, that means you two, his prescient words about the dire consequences of our meals. So, idiots back then, the same as idiots now. It's amazing, okay? Look, this is Leonardo da Vinci himself. I have from an early age abjured the use of meat. And the time will come when men will look upon the murder of animals as they now look upon the murder of men. Unquote. Leonardo da Vinci. Excuse me. Dismissed. So, with Albert Einstein. Hold on. Did Albert Einstein have something to say? Oh, he did. He did. All right, so with Albert Einstein, who wrote, "Nothing will benefit human health and increase chances for survival of human life on Earth as much as the evolution to a vegetarian diet." This is Albert Einstein, everyone, who is a confirmed genius, okay? A confirmed genius. Don't look at me. Don't look at me. I'm just on TikTok. I just slapped myself twice. Okay? I'm on TikTok. I slapped myself twice. So let's listen to Albert Einstein. An absolute genius. Chris, no one will remember your name. This is Albert Einstein. So sit down, beta male, okay, and listen to the alpha male who is speaking and reading from another alpha male, Albert Einstein. Okay, so I will continue on and read Albert Einstein's word one more time for the slower ones in the chat room. So Chris, don't think I do not care about beta males, because that's not what I said. Nothing will benefit human health and increase chances for survival of life on Earth as much as the evolution to a vegetarian diet. And Mahatma Gandhi, George Bernard Shaw, Emily Dickinson, Arnold Schweitzer, and others who are all smarter than Chris, it has been the same. We gladly take their gifts where they break the herding culture taboo, aka financially destroy you guys, and challenge the sacred cow of eating animal foods. All right, Chelsea Joe, that's absolutely incredible. Let me finish my words here, and I'll be right with you all. So the vegan revolution, all right, the core values of the old herding culture still define our culture, all right, as does its main ritual, eating commodified animals. Our deep urge to evolve to a more spiritually mature level of understanding and living, and to create a social order that promotes more justice, peace, freedom, health, sanity, prosperity, sustainability, and happiness absolutely requires us to stop viewing animals as food objects to be consumed and to shift to a plant-based way of eating. This would bless us enormously, liberating us from routinely practicing, denying, and projecting violence, and would help us cultivate equity and loving kindness in our relationships, as well as develop our capacity for inner serenity. By sowing and nurturing seeds of inclusiveness and sensitivity, we can reap an understanding for interconnectedness and an ability to live in peace. This means doing a lot of inner weeding because the herding culture into which we have been born, aka the food matrix, has sown in us the seeds of competitiveness, hubris, anxiety, and disconnectedness by viewing animals and people as thous rather than its. And by cultivating awareness and compassion, we can nurture within us the seeds of cooperation and caring. We are blessed by blessing others. By using or excluding others or seeking to control or dominate them, we become enmeshed in suffering and further enslaved to the illusion of separateness, which is the herding culture's fundamental orientation, okay? An absolute illusion is what these people operate under. Absolute illusion, okay? So when we cultivate mindful awareness of the consequences of our food choices and consciously adopt a plant-based way of eating, refusing to participate in the domination of animals and the doling of awareness this requires, we make a profound statement that both flows from and reinforces our ability to make connections. We become a force of sensitivity, healing, and compassion. We become a revolution of one, contributing to the foundation of a new world with every meal we eat. Okay, Taylor? As we share our ideas with others, we promote what may be the most uplifting and healing revolution our culture has ever experienced. In fact, when we speak of the various revolutions that have supposedly transformed our cultures, such as the Industrial Revolution, the Scientific Revolution, and the Information Communications Revolution, we are missing the bigger picture. None of these are actually revolutions at all, for they've all taken place entirely within the context of a culture of commodification, exploitation, and domination. These revolutions have not changed these underlying cultural values. If anything, they have further reinforced them. A true revolution must be far fundamental than these. The revolution that is demanded by our yearning for peace, freedom, and happiness must provide a new foundation for our culture, moving it away from its herding values of oppression and disconnectedness towards the post-herding values of respect, kindness, equality, sensitivity, and connectedness. Above all, this revolution must change our relationship to our meals, our most practiced rituals, and to our food, our most powerful inner and outer symbol. There is no action that more profoundly, radically, and positively embraces these revolutionary changes than adopting a plant-based diet for ethical reasons. There is no action more subversive to the established herding order than cultivating awareness in order to transcend this view that animals are mere commodities. We are waking up from the bad dream of commodifying and preying on animals. The revolution of compassion that is growing in our consciousness and culture requires that we stop eating animals not just for self-oriented health or economic reasons, but also from our hearts, out of caring for the animals, humans, and vast web of interconnected lives that are harmed and destroyed by animal-based meals. The word that sums up this underlying ethic and motivation is vegan, coined in 1944 in England by Donald Watson. Watson was dissatisfied with the word vegetarian because it does not account for motivation and refers only to the exclusion of animal flesh from the diet. So he took the first three and last two letters of the word, but wanted to pronounce it completely different to emphasize its revolutionary import, okay? Its definition in the Articles of Association of the Vegan Society in England reads, "Veganism denotes a philosophy and way of living which seeks to exclude, as far as possible and practicable, all forms of exploitation of and cruelty to animals for food, clothing, any other purpose, and by extension promotes the development and use of animal-free alternatives for the benefit of humans, animals, and the environment. So the word vegan, newer and more challenging than vegetarian because it includes every sentient being in its circle of concern and addresses all forms of unnecessary cruelty from an essentially ethical perspective. With a motivation of compassion, rather than for health or purity, it points to an ancient idea that has been articulated for many centuries, especially in the world's spiritual traditions. It indicates a mentality of expansive inclusiveness and is able to embrace science and virtually all religions because it is a manifestation of the yearning for universal peace, justice, wisdom, and freedom. Okay, so the origins of the term vegan is what that just was. All right, awesome. So the contemporary vegan movement is founded on loving kindness and mindfulness of our effects on others. It is revolutionary because it transcends and renounces the violent core of the herding culture in which we live. It is founded on the living truth of interconnectedness and thereby consciously minimizing the suffering we impose on animals, humans, and biosystems. It frees us all from the slavery of becoming mere commodities. It signifies the birth of a new consciousness, the resurrection of intelligence, number one, and compassion, and the basic rejection, of cruelty and domination. Out of my way. It is our only real hope for the future of our species because it addresses the cause rather than being concerned with merely the effects. From this new consciousness, we can accomplish virtually anything. It represents the fundamental positive personal and cultural transformation that we yearn for, and it requires that we change something basic, our eating habits, which many of them they're never willing to take responsibility for. That's fine. At some point, karma will be the wall that we are all looking for, and many of us will laugh when that occurs. So it's funny because it's funny how we want transformation without having to change. It is funny. I was just laughing at that. Thank you for the follow, Haley. 1 second. And for anybody else who followed me today, thank you guys. So yeah, I was just talking about how funny it was. So it's funny how we want transformation without having to change. Yet the fundamental transformation called for today requires the most fundamental change, a change in our relationship to food and to animals, which will cause a change in our behavior. To some, simply becoming vegan looks like a superficial step. Can something so simple really change us? Yes. Given the power of childhood programming and of our culture's inertia and insensitivity to violence against animals, authentically becoming a committed vegan can only be the result of a genuine spiritual breakthrough. This breakthrough is a fruit of ripening and effort. However, it is not the end, but the beginning of further spiritual and moral development. Veganism is still exceedingly rare, even among people who consider themselves spiritual aspirants, because the forces of early social conditioning are so difficult to transform. We are called to this nevertheless. Otherwise, our culture will accomplish nothing but further devastation and eventual... a word I cannot say. Thank you, Haley. Thank you, everybody. Welcome to the Holistic War Room Table. Okay, so number one, I don't know who the Haley family is. Number two, ceasefire all around the world. I know everybody right now needs to ceasefire, number one, okay? And come to some sort of conclusion. So no one here is supporting genocide except people who are still blatantly eating McDonald's every single day. That is you, user 6. So thank you. All right. Anyway, next up is chapter 3, the nature of intelligence. I will not get to that today. I will post this chapter to OnlyEvent619, my YouTube channel. Now, highlights. Because we had some low IQ users get totally obliterated by Albert Einstein himself, Pythagoras. Do we ever get a chance to pull out the rocket launcher known as Albert Einstein and blast somebody in the face? Well, today we have. Welcome, Loud, okay? So yeah, that was the highlight of my day. And look, thank you very much to everyone supporting. What I need to do at this point in time is end the live stream, okay? I will end the live stream, but I'll be right back. That is because I wanted to save chapter by chapter. And check this out. Yeah, thank you, Emmanuel, for the follow. And I'll be right back, okay? Wait, before I do that, because I didn't screen record, just let me check, because I wanted to see if I missed anything. Chelsea was in here earlier. Kristen was in here earlier. So yeah, guys, Chelsea is in another mess. Okay, cool. Not about the same thing. The same thing has always gone on. So yeah, I'm not going to read the next chapter, but I am going to log on, okay? We are going to end it here, and we'll be right back. Yo, Dane, only if you put it on a screen record, okay?